Hello? I actually have a loud voice. I could do it for
We're streaming for all of you technical photos.
Yeah, you just turned it off.
We're streaming live.
1, 2, 3. Everybody here? Okay. All right. I can lift this up though. I'm going to stand up.
So pull it close to you if you need to.
Yeah, I do. Okay, can everyone hear? Okay. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and start. Oh my gosh, I'm very teared up from the last presentation, but I'm going to go ahead and start. I am a graduate student in sustainable studies. I'm working on my toward my doctorate. I was a chemist, and I'm also an organic farmer in Dixon, New Mexico. I come from a long line of farmers. But what I'm doing is I'm studying basically symbiotic relationships of plants and microbes. That's what my doctorate's going to be in. But I've worked all the way, I hate to say it, but I've worked for Monsanto maybe 12 years ago as a graduate student when I was an analytical chemist. Just 1 year in wheat science at Colorado State. So I learned mechanisms of action because that's exactly why I was there. I wanted to learn the enemy. I hate to say it, but that's what I did. So go ahead and switch to the next one. So this is my outline. Basically, I'm going to go through a little bit of plant breeding techniques, genetically modified crops, breeding a mechanism of action. This is going to be very, just because I know a lot of times when I speak to people, they don't understand a lot of times the difference between hybrids and genetically modified crops. Yes. All right. I can do that. And then basically how genetically modified crops become resistant to, I'm going to just basically follow a herbicide all the way through so we can get an understanding of it. And then soil ecology, how all this is going to affect microbes and fungi. This is going to be a 10-minute talk, so I'm just going to roll through it. And then also, as an organic farmer like myself, how we manage weeds, the old school way. Okay, so go ahead. So basically, plant breeding techniques, there are several types of techniques that are used to improve food crops. There's mass, or it's also called artificial selection, and that's when you pick the best characteristics and you just pick them out of the field and you save those seeds. And as a farmer, and I also take care of landrace conservation, peppers, in northern New Mexico, and I take care of one that's been grown in the same exact field 170 years. And so I've been taking care of that for maybe 10 years. So we just pick the best characteristics, disease resistance, and that's what that's called. And progeny selection, same thing, it's a little more refined. Tissue culture, hybridization, and then also GMO. They're all within the same thing. So go ahead. So anyway, plant breeding, basically, we just do sexual crosses. So basically, the pollen and the female is, the egg. Basically, the seed, the seed is made of these three parts. I'm going to go through this pretty fast, but basically, the embryo has the diverse genotypes to produce a new combination of gene traits. So that's what gets crossed with bees or other type of pollination. This result is a diverse phenotype. And it's observable. You can look at morphological or quality traits in the progeny. So you're selecting for disease resistance. So as an example for peppers, if I see anything that's really susceptible to disease, I just kick it. I cull it. I don't let it be in the breeding population at all. So next one. Okay, so and basically, I'm just going to go through this really fast, but you select superior individuals from each generation and use them as parents for the next generation. And agriculturists have been doing this for years and years. I mean, the seeds I have for the land races, I've been carrying for 170 years in the same field, and that's across New Mexico. Don Bustos as well. I mean, he's got a very, very old land race, too. And so it's passed on with the field, basically. So basically, you look for sweeter fruit, higher yield, and you kick out the undesirable traits. Okay, this is called mass selection or artificial selection, but it's not random, is what the big deal is. So go ahead again. So that's I just wanted to put something visual up. So if I have a big field of corn, I'm going to look for the characteristics, especially in the middle of the field, that are going to be superior. So you select by what you see, the phenotype, the size of the corn. Is it uniform? Color, size, flavor, disease, resistance. Okay, again. So anyway, what is genetically modified crops? How does this differ? So this is the definition. An organism whose genetic characteristics have been altered by the insertion of a modified gene. And it could be a multiple genes from another organism, but this is the big point, not necessarily from a closely related plant or even a plant on some level. And you use techniques of genetic engineering. Okay, so again. So this gene pool basically shows you how they pick these genes. So the primary gene pool, if I was just doing plant by plant, say peppers, I would go for something that's very closely related. And so it's a plant by plant kind of cross. Secondary is a little farther apart. You can get sterility. And tertiary, same. It's very severe. But quaternary is very, I mean, there's no way in the face of the plant that they would ever cross. So what happens is there's gene transfer via transgenic methods. So plant bacteria, plant to, guppies, or, you can cross very many species lines that would never be crossed. Okay, so next one. So anyway, glyphosate, I did study this a little bit and everything, but I'll go through this really fast. But basically, proteins created by the altered food crops can be specialized enzymes, and all enzymes are proteins. And they regulate or deregulate cell processes such as disease or herbicide resistance. And they can create a frequency, a higher frequency, or a lower frequency. But basically, glyphosate controls this one basic enzyme. It's EPSP synthase. So it's a mode of action that it just basically interferes with this amino acid biosynthesis, basically. That's all it really does. And this is what it's called, a shikimate pathway. Okay, and then next slide. And so I just want you to get a visual of this sometimes. This is how different it is from a hybrid or a, just traditional plant breeding. So what genetic modified crops do is they take a DNA, basically they insert a modified gene of something that they find desirable, and basically down the line the information goes into a DNA sequence code for specific proteins, and then you have subunits. These are adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine, and these DNA molecules that carry the information. And then it goes down to RNA, which transcribes it. It reads it, and then it transcribes it into a protein. Okay, and then the RNA, basically where this is where the enzyme is going to be made. Okay, so next slide. And so this, again, what glyphosate does is it just, see where the green EPSP synthase is, that's the enzyme. All it does is it disrupts that for weeds. So basically it doesn't allow it to go any further on that pathway. So what it does is it inserts here for, like, say, like a genetically modified crop like corn or soybean. And so it protects it when it gets sprayed, but everything around it is theoretically not protected. So next slide. So how do genetically modified crops become resistant to it? So the same mass selection that I've talked about before, when transgenic crops are treated with glyphosate, this metabolic pathway is not turned off in the GMO plants. So GMO plants that are engineered for this doesn't get turned off. The transgenic crop with glyphosate resistance, such as corn, survives. Weeds, which are the target, will not survive. But I say in theory, and I say that very, very importantly. So next slide. So why do they become resistant to glyphosate? Okay, this was the most incredible thing I found online. But basically, when glyphosate was being developed about 10 years ago, weed resistance was not thought to be a concern in the early researchers and developers of this technology, because they based it on the fact that I'm sorry for this, but basically the researchers found it very, very, very difficult to insert this gene into the target crop. So their reasoning was that if it was difficult for them, then it would be difficult for the weeds to become tolerant. That was it. And in this document on the bottom, number 2, in their letter to APHIS, that's exactly what they said. They said, there's no way that they would become tolerant to this. So next slide. Next slide. Okay. So, and this is just a list of all the herbicide-resistant species that are going on right now. So kochia is a very important one. If you look at these, most of them are annuals with they throw out a lot of seed. And that's important later. Okay, so next slide. And I just wanted to give you a graphic kind of depiction of this. Is called the Gaussian curve. But basically, if this entire population is the weed population, and then you hit it with like a certain concentration of glyphosate, say the correct concentration, there's going to be a tiny bit that survives that doesn't die. And if it basically reproduces, that's the seed that is very, very, dangerous. So basically, this section of the weed population with this enzyme was sprayed. So I call that inoculation because you're inoculating the entire population to kill everything else out of except the ones that are resistant. Okay, and then that small section of the weed population survived with either a hyped-up metabolic pathway or progeny with higher levels of this synthase within year 2 to 10. That happened in about 1991 to 1995. Okay, what it means to a conventional farmer is the spray at recommended application rates is no longer effective and now useless against this new population of weeds. So the farmer effectively out-selected for this weed population the same way that we use mass selection. Okay, and then basically I found this paper. I used to work for Dr. Westra, and trust me, he didn't have a very good personality. But anyway, he is actually pro GMO. And so in this publication, he tells the farmers especially, and I saw a few really big farmers, when they started seeing this resistant, they come into Weed Science and they say, hey, we're having resistance here. And he just said, just put more concentration on it. Or mix all these herbicides together and then throw that on the weed. So in the next slide. Okay, so I found this in this same publication, basically. So all this depicts is in year 1990, maybe 6, the high rate of glyphosate, which is right here, the blue, super high, like almost twice as much was applied. And then the low rate is probably, I think it was in the middle of the glyphosate amount that we're supposed to. You can see that this is a 100-foot square foot like transect. Okay, so that's 10 foot by 10 foot. Okay, and so basically when you put the low amount there, you saw 450 weed lamb's quarter that were very resistant to it. They grew regardless if they got sprayed or not. But the important thing is with their recommendations, you still see this little spike, which means that there's still a small weed population, regardless of what you do to it. It's still resistant. Okay, and so the next one. So another thing I'm looking at is the beneficial microbes. So I did a little bit of study, or a little bit of work trying to find out if anybody is looking at the microbes and fungi to see how they're impacted by glyphosate. And these two studies basically say it's not, but it's not very definitive, and they're both from China, both funded by Monsanto. So and then I did find one today, and I'm going to read it a little bit more, but no one's really looking at it. There's very, very little work being done right now on this. So we don't know how the actual population or how the shift is happening. Microbes can be very mutualistic with plants, but they can shift to being parasitic with any kind of change as far as like mineral fertilizer. So I'm not sure exactly, how they're going to shift with glyphosate. So I'm going to do more research and see if there's any publications on that. And then next slide. And then so just so you know that kochia, as an example, is a weed that basically puts out a lot of seeds. So if you kill 80 or 90% of the weed population, but maybe 10 to 5% survive, they still put out millions of seed, each one of those plants. And so when you're an organic farmer, basically what you try to do is you try to not have any bare areas. So you use cover crops to basically cover your fields. But kochia can also be flamed really easily. You can actually just flame it, when it's actually coming up. And after a weed event, so if rain and disturbance, you can disc it several times, and you can really eliminate the seed bank. You don't have to use pesticides. Cover crops will protect the soil. It can choke out weeds. It has allelopathic agents like winter rye, and it won't even let, really won't let weeds even like germinate, pretty much. So what we use when we're organic farmer is integrated management practices and understand weed culture. So you really study the plant family to really increase the efficacy of control. And then next slide. And then this is my field. One of my about a half acre. I've got maybe 2.5 acres. And so you can see in the fall this is winter rye, and winter rye will not let anything grow besides itself. But it protects everything. It protects against winter winds, against weed encroachment, increases water retention, decreases erosion, and protects the soil ground ecology, which I study. So, I really don't believe in pesticides. And even something as harmless as it seems like the chrysanthemum, like pyrethrin, it can kill, indiscreetly. It's rated for organics, but it's still, you have to be really careful what you use. You can disturb and shift the ecology fairly easy. And that's pretty much it. Thanks.
play one on TV. So just like watching her daily. My name's Arturo Sandoval, and what I do really is build community. My lifelong commitment has been to let me sit down.
Do you want to just hold it?
Just sit.
Okay.
Is that better?
Yes.
All right, sorry about that. I'm here today to talk to you about the Cooperative Development Center of New Mexico, which is an economic development model we designed, and we're currently rolling out in traditional land-based communities across northern New Mexico. But really, to understand what we're doing, I really want to place all of our activity in a larger global context. If what we are doing is going to be sustainable over the long term, we believe it is important to consider several major economic themes and issues that are currently emerging across the globe. We consider these themes as important touchstones for all of our work currently in New Mexico. The first major global theme that's important to us is what author James Howard Kunstler in his book, The Long Emergency, calls the period of post-modernity that we will be reaching in the next 50, 75, or 100 years. He argues in his book that in this long emergency into an oil-depleted economy will change forever everything about how we live. This post-modernity period, he believes, may occur sooner than what we currently expect. He presents a pretty bleak picture for all of us on this planet. He does, however, offer one ray of hope. And let me quote just a paragraph of what he concludes in his book. He says, "The long emergency is going to be a tremendous trauma for the human race. We will not believe that this is happening to us, that 200 years of modernity can be brought to its knees by a worldwide power shortage. The survivors will have to cultivate a religion of hope. That is, a deep and comprehensive belief that humanity is worth carrying on. If there's any positive side to stark changes coming our way, it may be the benefits of close communal relations, of having to really work intimately and physically with our neighbors, to be part of an enterprise that really matters, and to be fully engaged in meaningful social enactments instead of being merely entertained to avoid boredom." And I would argue that we already have those conditions for post-modernity in New Mexico. We have those close communal relationships. We have those spiritual and community leaders who can show us the path to what I like to call the circle of hope. The second major global theme we embrace is the seminal work of native New Mexican and Rhodes Scholar Manuel Montoya, who's on the faculty in the business school here at the UNM. Montoya's thesis, which I am now going to pretty much read verbatim, is that global growth in the past decade is located in economies that contain the following 5 characteristics. 1, at least 20% of their population lives in relative poverty. Most of these people lie on the base of the global income wealth distribution pyramid. 2, their population is grounded in land-based, agriculturally driven economies. Historically, this land-based identity is an integral component of their culture, which is true in New Mexico. 3, most of these regions have encountered a significant period of colonization or state-driven occupation. Their post-colonial identity becomes a recurring challenge to economic growth. 4, as a result of the fragmentation of government, primarily due to colonization or state-driven economic control, these economies have complicated sovereignty issues requiring complex responses to institutional problems. For example, the resolution of land disputes and natural resource allocation, which is an endemic, long-standing issue in New Mexico with our Native American populations and our Latino land-based communities. And 5, Recently, within the past 50 years, a burgeoning tech sector has either replaced or competed with its agricultural sector as the central feature of its economy. Most notably, you've all heard of the BRIC countries. Brazil, Russia, India, and China have emerged as a group of economies with consistent growth at a time when most nations have encountered recessions and deep uncertainty about future growth. And that, of course, includes the U.S. Despite being in the wealthiest nation in the world, New Mexico can be characterized as a place that looks, acts, and thinks like those economies that are poised to dominate within the global economy by the end of the 21st century. It is in a unique position to leverage its current status in the world economy with its deep historical, cultural, and political similarity to those nations that have grown significantly in the past decade. That's just a small part of Manuel's much deeper analysis, which is fantastic. And his PhD dissertation on this topic will be published, I believe, next year. So with these two larger global concepts, we're going to enter at some point or another, maybe not in our lives. Is anybody here under 12? Maybe not in our lives, but certainly in our children's or grandchildren's life, we are going to hit that postmodern period where we're going to run out of oil and gas, and cheap so-called organic tomatoes from China will not be available at your local grocery store. So we need to keep those in mind in terms of, and keep those in mind as we develop our models, our cooperative models. So CODESE, the Cooperative Development Center, is a project of the Center of Southwest Culture, which was founded 22 years ago to work in northern Mexico and the greater U.S. Southwest with indigenous and Mexicano communities. We create and support sustainable lifestyles, and we do it through three major economic lenses. We do it through organic farming, we do it through heritage and cultural tourism, and we do it through value-added housing initiatives. So the cooperative model we use for all of our economic development work in Indio-Hispano communities assumes that integrating organic agriculture, cultural tourism, and value-added housing into a comprehensive regional plan is a strong approach in promoting and conserving the unique heritage and culture of Nuevo Mexicano families and their communities. So we are refocusing existing resources to achieve a 21st century income and sustainable lifestyles for traditional land-based communities. The cooperative model has been an established form of working together for the common good among Nuevo Mexicanos for several centuries. Communal land grants and acequias have been in place in New Mexico since Spanish colonization began in 1598 here. In addition, Native American communities up and down the Rio Grande Basin and across New Mexico have used communal irrigation systems for centuries before European colonization occurred. So our economic development model is based on several assumptions and that we believe are real place-based facts. One, we are trying to use existing land and water resources that these communities own, but we're applying them in new ways. Second, we're avoiding the need for major capital investment for success in the economic areas in which we concentrate on. Our farmers still own arable land and water rights. Native American communities still have senior water rights and arable land. We are surrounded, our communities, because of the historical colonization pattern that occurred in New Mexico, we have isolated private land holdings of small, poor Latino communities, totally surrounded by wilderness, forests, BLM lands. And we're getting these communities to rethink their relationship to these alienated landscapes. So, and the third thing we're trying to do is we're tying economic development efforts to those of the emerging global economies of Brazil, Russia, India, and China. We study the emerging trends there. We're trying to see where they're going. We believe they're ahead of us at this point, and what we're trying to do is see those macroeconomic models and then apply them in a microeconomic application on the ground here. So we're students of what's happening with the global economy. We want, we are like the people. We missed the industrial revolution. We missed the post-industrial revolution. We missed everything. And so we're so far behind, we're on the cutting edge is basically what's happening. You never know. So, for example, most of the arable land still owned by traditional northern New Mexico Indio-Hispano communities. For example, nearly 46,000 acres in Rio Arriba County alone is either lying fallow or planted with hay or alfalfa. Most Indio-Hispanos own small arable plots. When you started out with a plot 300 years ago, then you died, then your three sons divided that land in narrow strips, and then their sons divided, so now everybody has about a 3-foot lot running for a mile. But basically, most of their land, the arable land now is between 5 acres, perhaps as much as 20 acres per farmer. So let me give you a quick, really simple economic comparison. An acre of alfalfa or hay produces about 50 bales in northern New Mexico, and you can get between 3, maybe 4 cuts of hay or alfalfa per season. So alfalfa selling, last time I checked, for about $15 a bale. So if you plant hay or alfalfa, you can expect to generate between $2,200 and $3,800 an acre. Out of this, you have to pay the baler, who charges about $2 or $3 per bale. So basically, for a 3-acre alfalfa crop, a farmer in northern New Mexico can expect to gross an income of about $6,600 per acre for 3 acres, roughly. In contrast, an acre of organic fruits or vegetables in northern New Mexico is currently generating between $10,000 and up to $40,000 an acre. My friend Don on his farm generates closer to $40,000 an acre and probably busts through that. I'm hoping I'll be his heir when he passes on. It's not looking good so far. So basically, in comparison, for a 3-acre organic farm in northern New Mexico, a farmer can expect to grow between $30,000 and up to $120,000 per season. You begin to see the math. It's just math. It's all math and science. That's what we got to follow. So to date, we have already helped organize and incorporate 4 organic farmers co-ops, and we continue organizing new cooperatives in several other northern New Mexico communities. And we expect this season to collectively, among all our 4 co-ops, to generate between $15,000 and $40,000 in income, sustainable income, I might repeat, from our co-ops this year. Our phase 1 goal at CODESE is to create between 20 and 35 organic farming co-ops in northern and central New Mexico, Indio, Hispano, and Native American communities within the next several years. So that's what we're doing to try to create healthy communities, healthy people in united communities. In our ecotourism program, we have incorporated 4 heritage and cultural tourism co-ops to date in northern New Mexico. Here again, the beauty of our model is that these co-ops need very little capital investment to successfully become fully operational. To convince local folk about the potential success of these ecotourism co-ops, we have worked hard to change their perception of viewing national forests, BLM land holdings, and wilderness areas as obstacles to economic development, especially private sector development, and providing them a model that utilizes these public lands as a source of sustainable income for co-op members. So we have curanderos and curanderas in our communities that are traditional herb healers, and what we do now is we make them part of our co-ops, and they give a 2-hour tour for $15 a pop. So they go out walking anyway to shoot coyotes and bay at the moon. So now they take people along with them, and they charge them $15 a pop to learn about these natural herbs. And then if you're really into it and you get excited and hot and bothered, we'll sell you the herbs in packages already ready to go. So you can drink tea, smoke the tea. We don't care what you do with it, as long as you buy it. Our third economic development model is value-added housing. This is probably true for those of you that live in other rural communities around the country, and that is too many of our people live in substandard housing, including traditional adobes that have suffered from lack of maintenance, and mobile and manufactured housing. We hope to build multifamily housing units that mimic the ancient plaza model, families living in clustered housing around a very small central plaza. And we believe this model will use the built environment to create the social behaviors we want our villagers to express: cooperation, collaboration, mutual aid. I'm a single mom. I'm living in one of these small villages. My car won't start in the morning. I got to get to my job at Walmart. I go next door to my uncle Jose and say, Jose, get the damn car going. I got to go to work. And then I tell my mother-in-law, watch the kids. I'll be back at 7. So all of this, we've only been out in the field. We've only been out in the field actively for about 2 years, but several positive trends have already emerged for us. First, the concept of building businesses through co-ops instead of individual owners has resonated at a deep level among community members, and much more so than even we had hoped for. And there are so many advantages to organizing a business in this economic model in the capitalist society as a co-op instead of as a single entrepreneur. And I think perhaps we might be able to touch on that, on what those advantages are if we get to the Q&A. But it's just unbelievable how co-ops create an economic dynamic that goes on way beyond what an individual entrepreneur can do. Second, we have been incredibly humbled to find out that there is such a deep talent pool in these villages in which we are working. In every single instances among our co-ops, our members have improved upon our ideas, they've implemented efficiencies of scale, and they've sought and found their own resources at an incredibly successful level. They're thoughtful, they're hopeful, they're disciplined, and they're hardworking. And all of this, despite the fact that these communities are coping with serious issues of mental and physical ill health, deep poverty, and the cumulative effects of nearly 170 years of oppression in the Latino communities and more than 500 years among the Native American communities. That's a lot of oppression and colonization to take over such a long period of time. These issues of alienation and poverty are the single most difficult obstacle to economic development and creation of our ultimate goal, gente sana en comunidades unidas, healthy people in united communities. And I think these issues, we have to figure out a way in our economic development work in this kind of building community to deal with these very deep issues of alienation, of poverty, of colonization, and oppression. We're not dealing with them now. We're doing a shitty job. State institutions are doing a really bad job of it. We're losing people. In the first 3 months with our first co-op, we lost 3 of our 9 farmers to a double murder and a suicide. That was a low point, obviously, for us. So, and we have plans at Codice to take and adapt this model across the U.S. We'll be working in northern Mexico initially, and eventually we hope to socialize this model throughout Latin America. But I'm tired just trying to do New Mexico at this point. So right now we're just focusing on New Mexico, and we're very encouraged with the early results. We make a long-term commitment to these communities of at least 10 years. It takes about 5 years to get a co-op really functioning and get its legs under it. But our commitment is at least 10 years with all of these communities, and we'll be there as long as we possibly can. So that concludes my comments.
So Clayton, I have to just say just a word about Clayton. When we first heard that corn was being, he's the other one. When we first heard that corn was being, genetically modified corn was being commercialized and being planted all over, I called Clayton and I said, Clayton, what do you think about this GMO corn? And he just said, it's really bad stuff. And for quite some time after that, Clayton was an amazing spokesperson about protecting corn against GMOs, and continues in that. And so I personally really appreciate Clayton for doing that with me all those years ago and continuing.
Thank you. Is this working? Is this one working? All right. I would prefer talking about agriculture and farming, and I'll talk a little bit about it, but I was invited to talk about some of the work we've done in trying to, I guess, protect our communities and our culture and our very lives against this threat of GMO seed. But what Arturo was talking about is building community, and that's really was my driving force many years back. When I and my wife, I'll were thinking about building a family, that this is what we wanted to do, was to farm and raise our children in that manner, and it rebuilds family and community. And that's what we started out to do many years ago, and we've seen a lot of great results. If we go back to the first slide with the church, right there, that's a photograph that I took where we live, Tesuque Pueblo, north of Santa Fe. This is basically out of our front door, facing east. There was a rainstorm, and we had 2 rainbows out of that. And so anyways, when we first started hearing about GMOs, GMO, my first reaction was, one, it was disbelief. I didn't really think, I thought it was not really happening, you know. And then I kept hearing it, and then my second reaction was one of, I guess, sort of hopelessness, and then the third was sort of anger, as we began to learn more about it and try to understand it. And so, out of all these emotions, I work for a nonprofit organization called Traditional Native American Farmers Association. We had formed in 1992, basically trying to revitalize the agriculture in our communities of Native American communities, both here in New Mexico and Arizona. It was a long couple of days meeting that a number of farmers from a lot of different communities came together, mostly elder farmers at that point, and there was 2 younger families present. It was I and my wife and our youngest daughter, and another younger family from Arizona. And so we all were sort of talking about the same thing and what we wanted to see for ourselves and our communities. So anyways, that's kind of a little bit of history of us. But when we start hearing about GMO stuff, the other reaction is that we were kind of thinking or feeling is that it's not going to affect us. It's not going to bother us. So maybe we shouldn't be overly concerned about it. But as we start educating ourselves more and more about it, it become very, very alarming. And we did a lot. I myself personally tried to do as much research as I could, try to learn as much as I could, and then I was tasked to try to translate what I was learning back to our communities and to our farmers. What Loretta did this evening, I had to sort of try to understand that and then distill that to take it back to our communities. And there's maybe to go to the next slide. And this is what we're talking about. Mostly the biggest threat that that I was feeling was that it was with our corns, because it's wind pollinated, and pollens can transfer. They say up to a mile. I think it depends on temperature, humidity, and all that sort of stuff. But so, in theory, we could be okay here, but we don't know what the other farmers are doing, upwind from us. And then we're saying, well, we're pretty isolated, and we are. A lot of our communities are very isolated and away from any commercial operations and so forth. But then I heard that in some of the most isolated communities, Indian communities, their corns did get contaminated, and that was in the heart of the diversity of corn, which is in Oaxaca. And I finally did make it down there last year and talked with a lot of the farmers, and it was really at one point it's very depressing, very disheartening. But when we did finally discuss these things, it became very hopeful. But corn isn't just something that we eat, something that we that sustains us physically, but it also sustains us in many other different ways, and it also represents us as humanity. So any, I guess I'll say, contamination or attack on the corn itself is an attack directly to us as a human being and to humanity. As you can see, the older people have passed on stories about corn, and they say, this is us. We're no different. Corn is no different than human, and a human is no different than corn. So, next slide. So I was tasked. This is building family and community. This is us planting a couple of years back. As myself, one of my daughters, and two of my grandkids, a granddaughter and a grandson. And this is how we plant in our fields. So when I would go to, there was three things that we tried to achieve, I guess. One was to educate our farmers and our leaders in our communities as to the seriousness of this threat and to what we should do. One was to be aware of that threat. And again, it was where a lot of them were saying, well, we're very isolated, and I don't see how that's going to bother us. I said, well, do you know what's being planted in your communities right now? And some did and some didn't. And what was happening was because of the droughts that we've been going through in some of the very isolated communities that were dry farming, were exporting their seed to these other farmers that were irrigating for them for the drought year, and it was closer to other commercial farms. And then it was being brought back like the following year. So what happened to it? Has it changed? Or, there's potential there. And not just with corn, but other crops, but our main discussion had been on about corns. And then the other part was we were talking about the amounts of the diversity that we already had in our communities was also dwindling. This came out of the discussion that when we formed our association, when we were beginning to lose elder farmers, a lot of times the generations or the families weren't picking up the seed and replanting it. It was just being stored and left and not being replanted. So we lost some of that diversity in crops and so forth, and the amounts. So there was a couple of things happening at the same time. So we, as an association, we wanted younger people to get involved in it, and so we did a lot of workshops and so forth. And lo and behold, our young people are very, very interested in retaining and reviving agriculture in our communities. Also, just eating well, right? And that's sort of, to me, that's the ultimate. One of the ultimate goals is to eat very well. Next slide. So these are some of the things that we had grown over the years, and we shared seed. We got seeds from other people. We created community events, and we're still doing those. Our association co-hosts two events, one in the spring, one in the fall, with other associations. And we invited farmers, both native farmers and the Hispanic farmers, into these events. And we've been sharing that since I think '96, I believe. Somewhere or 2006, and because that was something that had been already in place, but it was sort of set aside for maybe half a generation or so. But it's been revitalized again. So we're exchanging seeds, but we're at the same time we're making sure that they understand these threats of not only just replacing the old varieties with hybrid seeds, but also the threats to the GE and GMO stuff. The next slide. And our work has actually expanded outside of New Mexico and Arizona. We've got, I and some of the younger people we've been working with go to other parts of the world. I just got off the phone with one of our students. He's a refugee from El Salvador from the Civil War. He's living in the United States, and he does a lot of stuff, amazing things, and he was talking to me about some of the students that we had worked with personally. There was a young lady that was actually just getting on the plane the day before to start similar projects in Africa and Uganda, and this is actually a project that we're doing in a school in Belize. It's a real small, very rural school in. There's all Mayan communities. It's a farming community, but they're also being affected kind of by this global economy. Most of the things that they grow is being to be sold in the marketplace. Maybe exported out of the country or somewhere else. So the students actually don't have really good nutrition, even in a farming community. And that can be said. That could be the same thing in our own industrialized farming communities in the United States. So these are starting some gardens in schools there. Anyway, next slide. This is a farm program there in Tisuque Pueblo. And this is one of the seed libraries that we started a number of years ago. And that was the other thing when we started trying to educate them about seeds, the diversity, protecting. We're encouraging individual farmers, communities, co-ops, or whoever to start what we call seed libraries, what other people call seed banks. We try to coin the term library because they're both lending institutions, and they're both are wealth, correct? Money and seeds is wealth. But this is also a library is knowledge, and so are these seeds as knowledge. So next slide. And this is me doing another workshop. This is also in Belize, another community. It's a farming community. They're also being affected by all this, these multinationals are trying to push GE, GMO into these communities. They're being told that it's, the greatest thing that's going to ever happen to their lives, and it's not. And so we tell them the other story, right? So next slide. This is actually just south of here. We go into a lot of the pueblos. And this is in Isleta, and we've been collaborating with other indigenous farmers and doing these seed tours. And this was part of a seed tour. This is in Isleta Pueblo with a group of Mayan farmers out of Guatemala that are also doing the same thing that we're doing. Next slide. This is back in Belize. Obviously, I like to go there. This is actually with the Garifuna community. And they also are experiencing the exact same thing that we're experiencing, no difference. Next slide. And this is some of the students that we work with. We do a 2-week, what I call Indigenous Sustainable Community Design course. It's based somewhat on permaculture principles, and we're building a seed library in Santa Clara Pueblo. Right now it's done. It's finished. We also finished one in Tisuque Pueblo just last year. And this is, we're teaching them about seeds, but also about building, and so it all goes hand in hand, building community. And I think that might be it. I'm not sure. Next slide. might go back to the rainstorm. Okay, I think that's my 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank Robin and Brett and everybody for inviting us here and sharing that little information. I also acknowledge our fellow panel members. I know them all pretty well, and listening to their story just re-brings of how well community works together and how we all share visions of saving the land and water for future generations. And we might be working in different communities, we might be using different methodologies, but you can see it only here in New Mexico, but you see it all over the place, how communities are starting to come together to have an alternative to what is now a globalized food system. So I just literally want to acknowledge you guys working on that and really keeping up the good work. Well, I want to start off briefly a little bit about the history. This is our small farm right here. It's located in the beautiful Espanola Valley. I named the farm Santa Cruz Farm. I named it after our church, the Santa Cruz Church. And then I named it after the Santa Cruz de la Cañada land grant, which was established over 300 years ago by 16 families that settled in the area. They worked hard, they suffered, and then they ended up owning this piece of lands right here. The 16 families, as Arturo said, were broken up later on by the different governments, and then a lot of our people were killed as the U.S. came in and then took over the governments and even disrupted our way of life even further. So we can speedball that up. This is our farm. It's 3.5 acres. We do 72 different varieties of produce. We do it 12 months a year, and we use nothing but solar energy itself. So we know it can be sustainable. I've also farmed several. I grew up on the farm with my parents and my grandparents, and we've been using the same rituals and the same traditions as my parents did, as my grandparents. And all I do is incorporate a little bit of new technology that allows us to be economically viable. This piece of land here I grew up on, I remember following Grandpa. Grandpa had an old mule, and he'd be in the fields, plowing up the fields. And we'd go ahead and plow up the fields every summer. And then he'd be working the fields hard, and then we'd go back and he'd harvest. Grandma would be canning the food and making the food on the wood stove. We'd be drinking out of the acequias, clean, pure water we could drink directly out of the acequias. And then in the 1960s or so, 1966, 67, my dad was planting sweet corn. And we had always had plant corn, chili, squash, the cucumbers, but the corn and the chili were our main crops. And it was always a little bit wormy. Sometimes we'd have a good crop. Well, an ag agent came out, and it's probably Camila's dad that came out, and he ended up giving us a bottle of liquid. And it ended up, we sprayed that on our fields, and we had the best corn we ever had. I don't think we had hardly any worms, but it was really good corn. It turned out to be DDT. And as we were kids, and I'm sure the story goes on, I've heard it over and over. We were kids, my dad built an old sprayer. He would drag it around to pump it off the PTO on the tractor and be spraying, and it'd be 85 degrees, and us little kids would be running behind that mist because it was so hot. You know, we were kids playing around with dad and stuff. We didn't know any better. But it was okay because the government was approved to be safe, right? And you can imagine how many people across the United States in the Midwest were doing the same thing just because our government was a little bit lax in taking care of us. So that's the way it starts. Anyway, we started to do that several years, and then in the 1970s and 1980s, I went to school. I graduated from school. I went off to the military, got in the military. Then I came back to the farm. My parents were getting older. Then in the 70s and 80s, I started to take over the farm again. And I started to go to the Santa Fe Farmers Market. We were doing pretty good, making money every week. And part of the thing is that we had good vegetables. On Saturday mornings, I'd go off to the farmers market. In Saturday afternoons, I'd come back. I'd take a little nap. I'd rest, and then I'd go out in the fields and dust the fields with diazinon and malathion, just to make sure that the squash bugs were dead and we had good pumpkins, because people love beautiful pumpkins. So I was doing that, and then my son was born, Emilio Jorge Bustos. He was born with Down syndrome, and you know, I love him. And I remember one day I went out there Saturday afternoon. I dusted the fields, and I came back in, and I had imagined. I saw myself walking across the carpet. I walked across the carpet, and Emilio was rolling on the carpet trying to catch up to me. You know how little babies do that? No, they just roll on the carpet, and I kind of saw the dust coming off of my pants. And I said to myself, this is crazy. I'm poisoning my own kid here just like I was poisoning everything else. And that's when organics was really starting to take off. And I go, hey, I want to be an organic farmer. So I said, I'll do away with chemicals. So I did away with chemicals. Took a couple of years to start to learn how to be organic. But I really didn't do anything differently. I did the same thing. I went out and bought the certified organic approved methods of killing bugs. So I was spraying pyrethrum, and I was using rotenone, and so I never really changed anything. But then later on, as you start to evolve and you start to learn more about farming, you start to say, oh yeah, we're going to change it. And now we've changed away from that now. Now we don't use any kind of chemicals. We don't use any pesticides. We don't use any additives at all. We've been certified vegan for about 7 years. And there's not a certifying agency, but we like to say that we're certified vegan. And the way we came about becoming vegan is that it was an interesting story too. I was invited to Washington, D.C. When Secretary Glickman was put for USDA Secretary of Agriculture. And as an acceptance speech, he was out there, and there was a big audience. Everybody was listening to him, and he was talking about how the United States had the safest food system in the world. The next breath, but there's 10,000 acceptable deaths within our food system. And then he went out to name some of the diseases and some of the E. coli and stuff that comes to the ground in farmers. And I was sitting in the back over there, and I kept thinking to myself, I eat that food. My friends and my neighbors eat that food. I'm not going to be using any kind of manures or anything if that's what's going to poison us. So that was another aha moment for me, from going from certified organic to taking it to the next level of trying to develop even a safer food for our family to eat. And then when I give it to my friends and everything, I know they're not going to get sick. I can guarantee you, the way we use our methods now, we're not going to get sick in the food we eat. So that was another evolution of change for Santa Cruz Farm, is how we went from chemical to certified organic, and then from certified organic to a little bit more vegan. These last 8 or 9 years, it's really been interesting. You know, we've done a lot of cover cropping. We've done a lot of native plantings for pollinators. So we have our borders with pollinator plants. We have pollinators in the middle of the fields. So we're attracting all these good bugs. We're learning how to work more with the systems and the nature itself as they used to in the old days. So nowadays you'll walk around the farm. It might look a little bit weedy, but it's intentional. It's not like we're lazy or we're not doing our work. It's intentional because those plants are attracting the beneficial bugs, are creating bacteria in the soil, and helping us get better and healthier soil, which in turn makes a better crop. So like as Arturo mentioned earlier, you know, we have these little 3.5 acres. We can generate X amount of money. We're not spending any money on chemicals. We're not using any kind of additives. And it's just a natural process that the soil and the environment itself makes it healthy, and you can get good, great crops. You can see also the season extension we've been doing is about 12,000 as cold frames, and we're using nothing but the passive solar system, and we're able to sell to the schools in the middle of the winter. And that's the model that Arturo and a lot of other folks are starting to follow. I started this kind of modeling in the 1980s, and we're limited resource. We were using PVC pipe. It was costing about $185 to put them up. They were a piece of junk. I'd be honest, it was a piece of junk, but it felt so good to be able to do something different, to be able to generate money to help feed my family, and to see other people taking up that same kind of an idea. Then the county extensions came in, and then Research Center and Del Jimenez came up. He goes, hey, we need to modify the plants like this, the plastic cold frames. We changed them. And then a little bit later on, we decided that's not even good enough. We were able to save up, and we started to buy these cold frames. And that's the model that we've been trying to tell people how to do. Let's put up some cold frames. Let's save some money. Let's use our water, and let's save our land, water, and environment for future generations. Next, please. This is one of our cold frames. This is one of the first ones that we put up. I paid $750 for that one right there. The second one behind it was donated to us by a guy from New York. Bought a ranch out there in Ojo Caliente. I wanted to turn it into a polo pony ranch. And he said, oh, the greenhouse doesn't look right. So he ended up just taking it away because it was junk. That little greenhouse right there of $750, I started to grow bedding plants in that. In 1 month, I got a bill for $750 from the gas company. And I was starting to put the pencil on the paper, and I kept thinking, man, I don't know if it's going to work. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. And that's when I came up with the idea of the passive solar system. I wrote it up. I submitted it to a granting organization called Western SARE. They approved it as a research and demonstration plot, and it really worked well. We went from $750 a month for natural gas to 7 cents a day to pay for a circulating pump to circulate that hot water underneath the cold frames. And then that heated the soil. We trapped that hot air rising out of the soil with a level of cloth, created a layer of ice, another layer of ice, and that hot air coming out of the soil was trapped under that layer of ice, and those plants loved it. And we were able to sell to the schools, and that's the way we ended up not developing but practicing it and tweaking out that kind of winter growing even further. Next. This is our fields. We try to keep them as clean as we can. Like Loretta said, if you don't keep your fields clean, you get more weeds, and then you're just working harder and harder. And I tell people, too, that this method of farming that we've developed, small acreages, intense kind of working, creating good markets, frees you up to have some kind of a social and a community life. People have always had this myth of if you're a farmer, you're a slave, you're going to get up in the crack of dawn, you're going to work till past dark, 7 days a week, and that's your life. If that's the way you farm, you're doing something wrong. And I'm here to tell you that you're doing something wrong, and maybe you should rethink of the way you're farming. So if you can kind of develop your methods a little better, you can free yourself up and still make enough time to enjoy life. Next. This is one of the cold frames that we did with a solar energy under it. And we did the raised beds because we put that radiant heat underneath those beds. We dug those beds down about 2 feet. We ended up putting about 8 inches of really good compost and organic matter on the bottom. We threw the soil back. We put the tubes underneath. We spaced them out. We threw the soil back on, and then we started to heat those beds. And that was several years ago, and it was a test. It was a research and test kind of a project, and it had a lot of flaws. I'm not going to tell you it's perfect. It isn't. We've rethought it. We'd like to do it again and change quite a bit more on it. Next. This is one of our perennial crops. So I tell people when we're teaching people how to grow, I work for an organization called American Friends Service Committee, and they've supported this work for over 10 years. We've been able to take that model I developed at Santa Cruz Farm, replicate it down in Albuquerque, help create what you folks saw today, Agricultura Network, where those growers just took off, and you can see how successful they are. And it's like Arturo said, it doesn't take a $2 billion stimulus package to get our country on the feet. It takes a little bit of resources and some innovation and some motivation to get it done. And I think you saw Agricultura Network. You saw how good they're doing today. We've taken that model and we were able to replicate it down in southern New Mexico, in Anthony and Chaparral, and we're replicating it up in Espanola and Mora. And then our next phase is we're going to start to link these regional food hubs together so that we have a really food, healthy New Mexico food system. But I tell people about the cropping itself. You need to get about 2 or 3 perennials and about 10 annual vegetable crops that you can grow. And we start, our first thing is how much do you need? And then if you need $1,000 a week, we tell you grow 10 crops. And all you have to do is make $100 of each crop. $100, that's like 30 bunches of beets, 30 bunches of kale, 30 bunches of radishes. It's not a lot. 20 pounds of spinach, 20 pounds of lettuce, and you have $1,000 every week. So you're not trying to feed the world. We're not going to try to save the world anymore. We're going to just try to make our healthy families, healthy communities, and healthy children. So once we start to think about, we're not going to be multi-billionaires anymore, but we're going to try to feed our family. We're not going to try to save the world. We're going to try to help our community. It just changes the way we think, and it changes the way we start to act. And that's the kind of philosophy and that's the kind of thinking we want to start to think about. Let's think more about local, more regional, and then that starts to create the model that the rest of the country and the rest of the globe starts to model after that. So these are asparagus. Next, we'll grow strawberries, we grow blackberries. This right here is an acequia. This is the acequia de Santa Cruz. It waters about 5,000 acres. That little bit of water there, if used correctly, can help communities survive into the future. But it has to be a statewide plan of how we do the water resource. As it is now, there's uncontrolled growth in New Mexico. The water's just being sucked up, and they want to start taking it away from farming. Take the water away from farming, what are you going to do? You're going to starve. Nobody's going to grow food. So let's think about what we're doing with our environment and with our water. Next. These are the coal frames that we build. It's coming towards sunset. Next. This is the passive solar that I was telling you about that got funded. It's really pre-60s technology. It's nothing brand new. And it's the passive solar panels that were donated to us. We put a small tank on this end over here, 750 gallons. We buried it underneath the soil. We put 2-inch styrofoam insulation, put sand and buried it so it stays warm and the cold water, the ground doesn't suck out the heat. You can see some of the pipe that we started to bury underneath there, and underneath those cold frames is that area. The water would get above boiling and steam, so we had to use a food-grade glycol in there so that it wouldn't freeze in the winter or turn to steam in the summer. Next. I want to talk a little bit about AFSC, as I mentioned. So AFSC is a national and international organization. It works across the country and across globally. I was invited to go to North Korea and China. North Korea we need to get some help out there to help feed those people. But our mission as AFSC is to protect land and water rights, promote economic viability through sustainable agriculture, farmer-to-farmer training, and technical assistance and policy work. That's the mission of AFSC New Mexico. Next. I'm going to go through these a little bit more. Over the years, we've been able to form what we call the Northern New Mexico Good Food Network, where Robin was part of our network and several other organizations, and working together on how we work within food systems in Northern New Mexico. Been successful, and we've been able to go and continue that model in different parts of the state. Next. Regional steering team, you can see who they were when we were forming that one organization. Next. Activities of New Mexico Food Network. Pretty much what everybody's been talking about. We had pretty good turnout, 440 farmers, and it was a really good turnout. You can see all the interest we had with it. Next. This is Harold Trujillo. Harold Trujillo at one point when I was going to become a vegan and we started to change, I'd buy certified organic alfalfa hay from Harold, and we put those in the fields, and that started to increase the organic matter until I got my cover crops going really well. Next. This is an example of a field that we were doing in a backyard here in Albuquerque. This was Pablo Lopez's first attempt that we started, and Pablo was now, as you met him, I think you met him or Fidel, he was one of the founding members of Agricultura Network. Next. This is another nice shot of the cold frame that we have. You can see that all our irrigation in all our fields is all drip system, so that we really value the water and how we use it. Next. Lavender that we're growing. We not only grow food, but we grow flowers for the soul. Next. La Placita Garden, when they were first starting up, I think you guys visited them today. Next. Beautiful greens. Next. 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 We work with universities. Different students come and visit the farms. We workshops there. Next. A work day at La Placita. We've been using and we practice a lot of different practices. We use plastic to help control the weeds, help bigger growth, and get better produce off the fields. Conserve water. Next. Another beautiful field. Next. This is our strawberry field. Just like our asparagus field, you know, it's a high value crop, and not very many people have been growing strawberries in northern New Mexico. We were one of the first ones. Right there you see about 5,000 strawberry plants. Each plant puts on about half a pound of strawberries, and we're selling it, I think, at $4 a pint. So it's a pretty good cash crop. It doesn't take a lot. Everything can be done on 3 acres, so you don't have to get too large. Next. This is our pond, because here in the Southwest we run into a lot of droughts, this year especially, and we don't get water as often as we should, so we built a small pond for holding, and then we can water out of that during the summer as we need it. In the far corner on the left, that's our blackberry patch back there. We had 500 blackberry plants we planted several years ago, and they start to produce in August. And we'll get about 6 weeks of harvest off of our blackberry plants. Get about 12 to 15 pounds per plant. And we sell those, I think, at $4 8 ounces at the farmer's market also. We do get snow, so the cold frames, you can see that the cold frames will produce in the middle of the winter. Next. My colleague, Saida Namaste, and our program development, Elizabeth, came out of Los Angeles to visit us. Next. That's it. That's our farm. Thank you.
So as you can see, we have some amazing, amazing people doing amazing work in collaboration here in New Mexico. Questions for anybody? Questions? Yes. He asked about wild plants as food. Who uses wild plants as food? Including weeds. Wild plants as food. Anybody want to take that one on?
You know, I think, I don't know if we'd call them wild plants. We'd call them food. Just because, I grew up, and I'm sure Clayton and Arturo and all of us grew up eating lamb's quarters, quelites, purslane, verdolagas, red-rooted pigweed, and we can go on, Clayton. I'm sure you can add a lot more to that.
Yeah, there's a lot of varieties of, I guess, different types of plants that just emerge. There's asparagus. But when we're farming and we're trying to cultivate our fields, a lot of the so-called weeds that in our fields, we leave them because we know that there's other values to them. Sometimes it's food. Sometimes it's food for other creatures that are also living there. So that's, we kind of leave the things that aren't going to do us a lot of harm and just try to take out some of the things that really become a pain after a while.
I don't eat weeds.
A good cover crop that keeps the weeds down until she's ready to plant her vegetable garden for here in Albuquerque.
So I'll start off. I'd recommend that you kind of figure out what kind of crops you want to grow, what kind of vegetables, and then you tailor that cover crop to meet those nutritional demands of that crop you want to grow. So, I don't want to say, you got to do all this stuff, but a soil test is really helpful, figuring out what you want to produce and then tailor your cover crops to that. But a general kind of a cover crop that I tell people to do, if you want to increase nitrogen, a cheap way to do it is pinto beans. And they grow really good here in the Southwest. They don't need a lot of water, but you don't harvest the bean. You just let it get to about 10% flour, and then you mow it down. If you want to go a little bit more traditional or more, not traditional, more modern kind of seeds that you'd have to import more, you'd look at maybe a hairy vetch, triticale, and Austrian pea mix. You get a lot of organic matter in there, you get a lot of nitrogen, and you'll get a lot of bacteria. If you want to break the soil, if you have a hard soil and you want to break the soil, use sunflowers. Sunflowers have deep roots. They break up the soil really well, and then when you mow them, you have tons and tons of organic matter back into the soil. But it's hard to. bindweed. There's nothing for bindweed. Man, this is like hell. Yeah.
So I did one I guess in the last 2 years, I'm actually using hairy vetch with winter rye, and it actually outcompetes bindweed pretty well, and it actually puts a lot of nitrogen down. But I'm seeing less bindweed now because of it. It's very aggressive.
Other questions? Yes. All of them. They're all community organizers here. Yeah. Okay. Arturo. So the question about the connections between the communities where you're doing the work and the people that you're trying to bring in for the ecotourism and to buy the food. How hard is it to make those connections, and how important is that?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. We thought about that carefully, and it's evolving. So we have a food truck called Quetzalcoatl that we bought, and it's a work of art. Don, you just saw it the other day. It's a beautiful truck. So what we do is we buy as much of our food from our farmers' co-ops in these villages where we're doing ecotourism co-ops also. So in fact, it's a very complementary relationship, number one. Number two, in ecotourism, our ecotourism director is head of an organization called the Mesoamerican Ecotourism Alliance based in Managua that actually has worked across 7 Central American countries for about 25 years. He's developed a method of impact so that the communities themselves control how much impact you get from tourism. So most communities don't want to end up looking like Santa Fe, sort of Disneyland version of Spanish colonial Pueblo style, blah, blah, blah. Although it's nice and they got great restaurants there. But the communities actually control the level of tourism, and they control it very carefully. And so there's a complementary relationship between our ecotourism co-ops and our farmers co-ops, and we're building that more and more. We're going to buy eventually 80% of the food we sell to the tourists as they come through. The prepared foods will be coming from our farmers co-ops. Does that answer your question?